Welcome back to Let's Talk Sports Radio right here on 94.9 Bob FM. Joining me now, mixed martial arts reporter for TSN out of Toronto, Ontario, Canada, Aaron Bronsteter. And Aaron, it's one of the biggest cards of the year. UFC 244 hits Madison Square Garden tonight. Headline by the bad MFer title at welterweight, Jorge Gamebred Masvidal versus Nate Diaz, the West Coast gangster. I can already hear the streets of New York in the background. Welcome, Aaron. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks for having me on, Jordan.
So, I don't know if this is going to be one of the best cards of the year, but it's certainly the best built card. It is so stacked, this card. So stacked, right even to the prelims. And it's headlined by two guys who took time away from the sport and have come back with a vengeance. Masvidal returning to the ring in March to knock out Darren Till, who's also on this card, and then knocking out Ben Askren, his first loss of his career in a record time, 5 seconds. Some people say it was 3. And Nate Diaz, of course, returning to the octagon. Of course, he beat Anthony Pettis by decision back in August. And, just a great build and a great return of these two fighters at the Mecca, MSG. Tell me, what do you think of this fight? Because, they got a special belt made for this. Apparently The Rock is going to present it to the winner of this fight. It's just got a great special feel to it, this card, and it's headlined by a great fight.
Yeah, what makes MMA so cool is that it's got a good mix of sport and spectacle. And I don't think that, you have it skewed one way, often to just sport or just spectacle. I think this one skews more towards spectacle. Obviously, there's sport involved, but I think that the cool thing about it is you got a main event that's a non-title fight. I mean, you can call the BMF title a title. It's more of a trophy, in my opinion. But regardless of that, you got two guys that are headlining one of the biggest cards of the year, Madison Square Garden, on just name value, which I think is so good to see in MMA, and something that I really hope happens more often, because the UFC is so hung up on making all of these title fights, having they need to have some sort of title on the line in order for it to be a pay-per-view. And I just don't think it's necessary. I think that you can build events based on, if they were to do a John Jones versus Francis Ngannou fight at heavyweight, that should be a main event, regardless of whether there's a title involved or not. You can make these big fights that the fans want to see without having to involve a title all the time. And I think that's what makes this event so cool. There's no titles on the line. You got Darren Till versus Gastelum in the co-main event, with Darren Till moving up a weight class. A fight that I don't think a lot of people would have had top of mind, but a great fight. And I think that that's just what makes this card such an intriguing proposition for the UFC. Something entirely different and something very cool.
And what about the main event itself at welterweight? Masvidal, of course, coming off 2 knockouts. And, in some scrums, he said he got tired of, losing via decision. Of course, prior to his layoff, he lost a decision to Stephen Thompson, who's also on this card. And he lost a decision to Damian Maia. But before that, he's had some good wins under his belt. He knocked out Cowboy Cerrone. And then you look at Nate Diaz. He says there's no gangsters left. And, we talked about him in a previous episode. Dana White said he's not a needle mover. And then he goes out and defeats Anthony Pettis. Of course, those 2 great fights against Conor McGregor. They both have great stories. And, Masvidal's kind of not come out of nowhere, but he's really figured out how to play the MMA game. He's got his own web series on YouTube. And, he's dressing up like Scarface at the press conference. He's really embraced this return. And he's doing a lot of major media. Obviously, knocking out Ben Askren in 5 seconds helps. But what do you like this fight? Like on paper, 5 rounds, main event? Do you think this is going to be a good main event?
Oh, absolutely. I think that this is a great stylistic matchup. It's one of those ones that's very difficult to call in terms of who is going to get the better of who from that standpoint. But, yeah, as you mentioned, Masvidal's star has risen so quickly this year. If you think about the Till fight earlier this year, then, of course, the knockout heard around the world against Ben Askren, this guy's star rise has been absolutely meteoric. It's unlike anything we've really seen before in this sport, where somebody who's been around for so many years, been in Bellator, Strikeforce, UFC, to have his star climb to this level so quickly out of nowhere, it goes to show that he's picking the right fight. And it's also a product of him taking fights that other people didn't want to take. Nobody wanted to fight Darren Till. Nobody wanted to fight Ben Askren. Line up, not fall, knock him down, and he's done that spectacularly. And that's why he's in this position now to just continue to build that star. Whereas Nate Diaz, who's been away from the sport for some time, comes back this year, has a great showing against Pettis, And it was just, basically it was lightning in a bottle. The UFC got lucky. They fell ass backwards into this incredible main event, just based on entirely on circumstances. No beef between these guys, but both of them stars in their own right in this division, 170 pounds. And it just happens to just all come together perfectly over the course of, 2 months? I think one fought in July, one fought in August. And it's just, again, it's kismet for them. And they got very lucky in that regard. And I think it's just a perfect scenario for everybody involved.
All right, you mentioned the co-main earlier. Darren Till moving up to middleweight to face Kelvin Gastelum, who's coming off that war with now middleweight champion Israel Adesanya. That, of course, was for the interim title. That was back in April. Till looking to get right, and he's moving up to middleweight. He's coming off getting knocked out by Jorge Masvidal and getting choked out by a then welterweight champion, Tyron Woodley. Gastelum has said in media appearances that this was the fight he needed to fight, and why not go and fight Darren Till? For Darren Till, he's moving up, and he's moving up. He's getting a top 5 contender here. I think this one should be quite good as well.
I think this is a case of low risk, high reward versus high risk, low reward. Till, to me, this is an incredibly low-risk, high-reward fight for him. Nobody's expecting him to win this fight. He's moving up in the division. He's coming off 2 losses in a row. And he's facing perhaps the best guy in the division, not named Adesanya. Kelvin Gastelum has been a beast at 185 pounds. And to me, this is the first time that Gastelum in his career, I think he's fought 16 times something in the UFC. This is his first time fighting a younger opponent. He's just been around forever. He's been beating all of these guys en route to a title shot that he finally got, was unsuccessful when he got that title shot. But I think that, because of that expectation on Till that he's going to lose, if he wins, he's suddenly a top 5 middleweight, and he's close to a title shot once again. That's all it would take. If you knock out Kelvin Gastelum or beat Kelvin Gastelum, you're in title contention. So it's a good time for him to move up in the division. It's a good matchup for him to take. And then for Gastelum, he's basically somebody who has some name value, but again, coming off 2 straight losses, not a contender at middleweight, not ranked at middleweight. So to me, it's just, I know you get to be in the co-main event at MSG. It's a big deal. You're on a big stage. But what really is the upside for Kelvin Gastelum? Is he going to get a rematch with Adesanya by beating Darren Till? I don't know. I'm not sure how sold I am on that. So I'm not really sure why he took this fight. But what I do know is that it's going to be a really enjoyable one.
You could say that circumstance also applies to another fight on this card, also at welterweight, Stephen Wonderboy Thompson versus Vicente Luque, who's looked really good. He's on looks like with a 6-fight win streak. Wonderboy's lost 2, got knocked out by Pettis back in March. Brutal knockout. Wonderboy's been around for a while. Another guy, he's getting up there in age, 36. Whereas you look at Vicente Luque, his star is on the rise. He's only 27. Here's another fight where, what is, how many more fights does Wonderboy have left? And, for Vicente Luque, this could put him in a prime spot in the division, right there with, the Masvidals and the Diazes of the world. Yes?
Absolutely. And you know what? I thought that the way that Thompson approached this was incredibly mature. He basically came out and said, I used to be Vicente Luque. I was on a winning streak. People didn't really want to face me. I was the guy who was on the rise, and I needed somebody like myself to face at that point in time, a veteran, somebody who was respected. And he goes, I'm willing to give Vicente Luque that opportunity, but it's also important because I need to beat this guy. I need to be the one who wins this fight. I need to show that I still belong at the top of this division. And I think, I've always been Stephen Thompson. He's a professional. He's one of the nicest guys in the sport. And he's one of the most exciting guys to watch in the sport because of his unorthodox karate style and how he's been able to integrate it into MMA. So, when this fight was first announced, I said this is for the NMF title, the nicest MFer in the game, because Vicente Luque is another incredibly nice guy. He's always got a smile on his face. He's very laid back in the cage. He uses kind of his laid back nature to his advantage. So, I love this fight. I'm really excited to see how it plays out. I'd like to think Stephen Wonderboy Thompson still has what it takes to beat these young up-and-comers. And I also think Vicente Luque is one heck of a prospect, so I think we'll learn a lot from this fight, and that's always what I enjoy.
Yeah, and Luque's 4th fight of the year, of course, Fight of the Year candidate back in February. Him and Brian Barberina had a war there. A few more fights I want to look at. I know you're busy. Appreciate you giving us some time. We're on with Aaron Bronsteter from TSN. Kevin Lee, after going to welterweight, comes back to lightweight, and he draws the undefeated Gregor Gillespie, the king of the Finger Lakes. Lee's had a tough little run here, dating back to 2018. Loses to Raging Ally Quinta. And, triangle submission, loses to Rafael Dos Anjos in his welterweight debut. What do you think of this fight? And Kevin Lee's, of course, is going into this. He's been training at TriStar with George St. Pierre. He's rejuvenated. He's refocused. This is an interesting spot for Kevin Lee. He needs a win here, yes?
Yeah, very interesting circumstance. I actually like it from the standpoint of Kevin Lee because he, at this point, I think needs to bounce back. And he took a very, very tough challenge here in Gregor Gillespie, but he looks good on the scale this morning. He's being trained by Faraz Zahabi, training with GSP and all of those folks up in Montreal. And I think that we're going to see a new Kevin Lee, a different Kevin Lee. But at the same time, Gregor Gillespie was a national champion in NCAA wrestling, which you so seldom see in the UFC. And I think that, that's the kind of pedigree he's bringing into this game. And he's the type of guy that, even though he's ranked in the lower half of the division, he can beat anybody on any night. He might be a bad matchup for Khabib because of how good of a wrestler he is. That's how good of a pedigree Gregor Gillespie has. So if Kevin Lee is able to expose something in Gregor Gillespie that we haven't seen yet that will allow him to get this win, it would be so huge for Kevin Lee and his stock. But Gregor Gillespie, this is the biggest name he's fought. This is the highest ranked fighter he's fought. And this is his chance to get into title contention. So a lot on the line for both these guys right now.
All right, one more question here for you. Of course, you have heavyweight Derek Lewis coming off a 2-fight losing streak, was knocked out by Junior Dos Santos and, of course, choked out by Daniel Cormier. But I want to go to this headlining prelim fight at light heavyweight, Corey Anderson versus Johnny Walker. Johnny Walker, undefeated in the UFC, 3 knockouts, 4 if you count his decision win in the Contender Series, versus Corey Anderson, a guy who kind of carries a little bit of a chip on his shoulder, feels he should be more considered, for a title fight. We talked on a previous episode, if the person that comes out looking good this fight might have a chance at John Jones, but, we saw Dominic Reyes knock out Chris Weidman just a few weeks ago in the first round. This is a great fight to headline the prelims.
Yeah, absolutely. This is a fantastic fight. Johnny Walker has been so explosive and so much fun to watch since he's entered the UFC. He's a guy that's getting all of these first-round finishes, and he's doing so in spectacular fashion. When you see him do that, that's the kind of thing that gets you a title shot. He's fun. He's always energetic. He's always got a smile on his face. His English is really improving, too, which is, it does play a factor in terms of the marketability. And he keeps saying he really wants to fight John Jones. It's not just about the belt for him. He actually wants to be the person to beat John Jones. That's, where he is getting his, excitement from where he's at right now in his career, which is refreshing to hear. So I think with a win, if he's able to put Corey Anderson away in the same fashion that he has, the Serkinov, Justin Ledet, I think he'll be next in line for a title shot. I just think that he has that kind of it factor that the UFC is looking for. But Corey Anderson's not an easy out. Corey Anderson is one of the better wrestlers in the division. He's got some of the best cardio in the division. And if this fight goes the distance, you have to imagine that there's a good shot that Corey Anderson wins this fight. So it's going to be exciting either way. I don't think that Corey Anderson, unfortunately, has enamored himself to UFC brass. He seems to be an afterthought in the division, and he's going to need to do something spectacular if he wants to put his name in the conversation, even though he's on a good streak. And, he's beaten the likes of Jan Blachowicz, who a lot of people had mentioned as potentially being the next title challenger. That's really the last puzzle piece at light heavyweight is Blachowicz versus Jacare, which is coming up in a couple of weeks. So we'll see how it all plays out, and I think that it's going to give the UFC potentially some really good options.
You know what? I lied. I have another question for you. I'm sorry. So much has happened since last we talked. Buying or selling Dominic Reyes after knocking out Chris Weidman in the first round of USPN on ESPN 6 just a few weeks ago is the next contender in line for John Jones?
Again, it's really hard to say because, we have this Johnny Walker fight. We have this Jacare versus Blachowicz fight. There are a lot of moving parts right now. It's hard to really comment on it. Right now, if you're asking me about today, I think that Reyes should be next based on what he has done recently. You don't want to get caught by recency bias, but I think that Johnny Walker has a chance to show him up. I think that, Jan Błachowicz has a chance to keep his name fresh. And then you've also got, at the end of the year in December, you've got Alexander Rakic versus Volkan Oezdemir. That's another really intriguing matchup that can play into this title contention picture. So there's still a lot to learn before we can really declare who is next in line for John Jones. And John Jones is starting to say that he's bored of all these light heavyweight challenges. He feels like there's no money fights for him right now at light heavyweight. He might move up to heavyweight. So there's just a lot going on right now that makes it difficult to give an opinion. We have the rest of the year booked in terms of main and co-main events. So why not just let the dominoes fall and happen?
Were you impressed with Dominic Reyes knocking out Chris Weidman, who, he's been knocked out, 5 times now, and he might be at the end of his career. That was a pretty impressive knockout, would you say?
Very impressive. The thing that I love about Dominic Reyes is that his best tool, a lot of guys like Johnny Walker, he loves to move forward, loves to throw, pretty risky attacks. Dominic Reyes is actually best when he's working off of his back foot because of how much athleticism he has. Like, again, I've mentioned this, I think, to you, that he used to be a safety in college football at 6'3", which is pretty unheard of. But that's the kind of athleticism that he has. And when he's able to utilize that in MMA and put all of that force into his shots, especially his counters, I think that's where he's at his very best.
And I have one more question. I apologize. Last weekend, Singapore, the grappling main event between Damian Maia and Ben Askren at welterweight. Ben Askren submitted. What a great match that was. And, Ben Askren comes out, I believe it was on Ariel Helwani's show this week, and he says, I'm considering retirement. Number one, what'd you think of the fight? And number two, are you buying that Ben Askren is considering retiring?
Well, to answer the first question, I thought the fight was a really interesting chess match. I thought that, even though some people are saying that Ben Askren's striking didn't look good, I actually thought it looked better than it had previously. I thought that he had done a lot to impress me in that fight in the stand-up game. And listen, losing to Damian Maia doesn't make you a lesser fighter. This was a total stylistic matchup of a wrestler versus a jiu-jitsu player. And, in those situations, if it goes to the ground, you have to think that the person that's better at jiu-jitsu is going to win the fight by submission. I can't say it wasn't going Ben Askren's way on the feet. He was looking okay. It could have really gone either way. It was basically one judge had it for Maia going into the third, and the other two had a split. So, I think that if he would have kept it on the feet, I think it would have been a better chance. I do think that when you go to the ground with Damian Maia, you're playing with fire, but I don't think it makes him a lesser fighter. I still think that he can beat almost anybody in that division, even though he looked pretty rough in his first 3 outings in the UFC. But is he considering retirement? I think he would. I think that retirement is a legitimate option for him because, and based on the way he explained it, when he came to the UFC, he was probably, before he had fought a single fight, closer to a title shot than he is now. And that's the reality of it, is that he looks at the road ahead and where he would what he would have to do to prove that he's the best in the world. And the road is very long. He feels like he doesn't have anything else to prove in his career, really. People know what he is. But, that's an emotional response. That's a couple days after the fight. So, you have to take a step back and think about, what you're going to do from here, weigh your options, and then decide if retirement's for you, and it might be.
My emotional response, Aaron, great job as always. I wish we could talk MMA all day, but you're a busy man. You got weigh-ins, you're in New York City. What are you going to do with your free time, if you have any at all?
Well, today is not much of a free time day. It's hard for me to discuss that. But a friend of mine who I grew up with lives in Brooklyn, so I'll spend a lot of tomorrow with him, and probably tonight as well, after everything is wrapped up for the day. But Jordan, thank you for having me on. I know that your emotional reaction was that this was a good interview, but maybe next time we talk, you can look back, assess it, and let me know how you really feel about this.
You're the man, brother. I always appreciate your time. Aaron Bronsteter, TSN reporter. More Let's Talk Sports Radio right here on 94.9 Bob FM. Stick around. Good morning, K-Man, and welcome to Let's Talk Sports Radio right here on 94.9 Bob FM. LTS 22. No time to waste, folks. No time to waste. Why? Because there's a lot of unrested and tired rugby fans out there, one of which I dragged into my studio today. He's keen to talk about rugby. The Rugby World Cup has come to a conclusion, the 9th Rugby World Cup, and for the 3rd time, South Africa, the Springboks, are your champions. They defeated England just a few hours ago, 32-12. Joining me now to discuss Conal Keane. Good morning, Conal. How are you?
Good morning. Good to be here again.
Good. You are keen, right? Keen to talk rugby, so there you are. I didn't watch this match. That's why you're here. Tell me about 32-12. South Africa beats New England. On the scoreboard, it looks soundly, but you said it was a tough match for the majority of the final, yes?
It was. The Springboks brought their power game today. I predicted England would win it last week. That was before we knew that South Africa were actually going to get into the final. South Africa didn't produce the most inspiring display against Wales last Sunday. But today they brought it all. They brought the kitchen sink and they unnerved England. They battered them physically. They brought an old school power game in their front five, which led to a dominant scrum. Handré Pollard has come of age in this World Cup, their outside half, and he kicked pretty much everything. And then they basically tidied up the pieces in the last 10-15 minutes with their speedy wingers, Mapimpi and the brilliant Cheslin Colby, scoring 2 late tries, which put a gloss really on the scoreboard. A little unfair to England. They were completely out of sorts, to be honest, Jordan. They were so good. We talked about them last Saturday. It was a performance of a lifetime, and they just looked so flat this morning. Very hard, I suppose, to get to the same emotional pitch that they did against New Zealand. Kyle Sinclair, their buzzing kind of tight head prop, got knocked out of the game within 2.5 minutes. Sickening clash of his head with Mario Toje's elbow, which took him out, which was a huge blow for them tactically because they'd usually expect to get at least 60 minutes out of him up front before bringing on Dan Cole. That kind of stunned them. The South Africans put a bit of width in their game, which is a collector's item. These Boks like to kick the ball and smash people. They weren't known for putting a bit of width on the ball, but they threw in a few curve balls today. And they eventually just kind of got on top of them in the arm wrestle, penalty after penalty at the scrum. They had a French referee very much on side. There'd be a few gripes from the Englishmen on the island about him.
Always the referees. Why do they have to ruin stuff?
Yeah, look, these French guys, they're not shy using their whistle. In these high tension finals, unfortunately, teams are going to try and get an edge. And, particularly at scrum time, he has to make a call. These scrums are going down. The South Africans, to be honest, were just going forward. They were pumping the legs. They got on top of Dan Cole. Some of the penalties were pretty obvious. Some of them were a bit 50-50, I have to say, and England will be pretty upset about that. But on balance, given how low their performance was compared to last Saturday, I don't think the English can complain too much.
So what was the biggest difference? Obviously, you said England, there was a drop-off in performance. You talked about penalties, talk about losing a key player early on. If you had to pinpoint it, what was the biggest difference between what you had seen? Because clearly it sounds like England didn't play their best. They perhaps maybe peaked a week too early.
Yeah, no, that's a fair comment. It's a combination of a couple of things from South Africa. Their scrum is the thing everyone will talk about because that's what directly led to their penalties. But I was really impressed with their overall defence. Not just coming off the line at speed, which is kind of your basic requirement in international rugby, but the intelligence of their decision-making defence today I thought was absolutely brilliant. Faf de Klerk, the smallest man on the pitch, defended on the outside, blitzed up, made some huge hits on England's big men. At second centre did likewise. Their wingers were very intelligent. They shot up out of the line. They stopped England putting width on the ball. That was one of the big features of last week. England's distributors, Ford and Farrell, could get the ball out to the men on the flanks. The South African guys shot up exactly at the right time. It's not an easy thing to do because if you come up too fast, you get picked off. They showed a lot of intelligence, a lot of balls to do it, and they executed kind of an almost perfect defensive display, almost at a higher level than England were at last week. So that was the big thing.
So, and then what about South Africa? You said last week, they didn't look their best, and then, they do a complete 180 in the final. Obviously, they're saved their best for the most important game. Do you think that was, by design, or what was the biggest difference between South Africa last week to South Africa this week?
It was just, they were a world apart. I mean, we predicted last Saturday that the game against Wales was going to be very tight, very unattractive, and it proved to be that. I mean, South Africa just kicked the ball all day and came out on top in a kicking battle. It was a battle of nerves, and on paper you looked at them and said, look, they've no ambition here. They've no second or third gear or second or third game plan to go to here to beat England if England vary it up a bit. But, they said they just trusted in what they knew, which was, a lot of brutality in the physical contact areas, an outstanding scrum, disrupting England's set piece. And they just trusted in that. And when you do these simple things in rugby, Jordan, and you put pressure on teams crack. And I mean, South Africa are an unbelievable story because 3 years ago, this team were in absolute disarray. They would have been 7th or 8th favourites. In 2016, the calendar year, they lost 8 internationals. They sacked their previous coach, Alistair Coetzee, 18 months ago. They brought in Rassie Erasmus, who was in with his team coaching in Munster in Ireland. Very astute guy, very smart guy. He was a very, very good combative player in his day. But his appointment was really for maybe 4 years down the line. There was no prospect of him, performing this miracle in the space of 18 months. And he's done that. I mean, it's an unbelievable achievement, a testament to his intelligence and, what he can do in a short space of time. And, I mean, Springbok fans are going to be excited now. What's he going to do in the next 4 years with his vision when he has more time, more money to implement it,
Mm-hmm. So where does the sport go from here? Obviously, in another 4 years, another World Cup. South Africa gets their third Rugby World Cup, and England, good showing. South Africa fans are happy. England fans not too happy. Hurricane Man. What does this mean for we talked in previous episode last week. Parity is not exactly good for a sport. You want fresh faces and new winners, but where do you go from here?
I think obviously this is the Mount Everest for rugby teams in the 4-year cycle. There is plenty to play for. I mean, typically you're going to get a lot of retirements in some of the bigger teams and in all the teams. I mean, this is the pinnacle for players. So, for example, in New Zealand, we'll lose 4 or 5 great players. I don't see them having to undertake some sort of huge rebuilding operation, because New Zealand produced these guys off the conveyor belt with ease. And to be honest, New Zealand aren't that far off the top of rugby. They would fancy themselves to beat South Africa tomorrow. They beat them at the start of this tournament. England similarly have quite a young team. South Africa have a couple of older guys, but they also have the coaches now and the infrastructure being put in place to rebuild. So those 3 teams, I think, are going to be the future of the 15-a-side game in the next 3 to 4 years. Very hard to see other teams breaking into that. We have the Lions Tour, which I'm not sure you're familiar with. It goes on in 2 years in South Africa. Basically, it's the best of the British Isles and Ireland, who every 4 years they go and tour either Australia, New Zealand or South Africa. That's in South Africa in 2 years. The appetite for that will go way up now that South Africa are the world champions. So that's probably the next international big calendar date. But for a lot of these guys who are based in Europe, they go back to their clubs next week. I mean, they have to dust themselves down and they have to earn a living. So, I mean, they can't kind of sulk or, rest on their laurels. They have to go back to work.
Any thought on the third place match? New Zealand smashes Wales 40-17 yesterday.
Not really. There's kind of a big debate about whether that game should go ahead. Both teams pretty distraught after losing semi-finals last week. But it was a nice swan song for a number of New Zealand players that I mentioned. Sonny Bill Williams, Ryan Crotty, Ben Smith out on the wing, and their coach Steve Hansen, who's been one of the greatest in rugby union history. So it was a nice way kind of for them to bow out. But the game itself was a bit of a non-entity. New Zealand wanted it more. Wales were tired, not really at the races, and New Zealand kind of beat them comfortably. There'll be a big debate now as to whether that game should take place in future tournaments. All
right. If you have any thoughts about the Rugby World Cup, send us a WhatsApp, 525-1949, or dare call in live, 233-9494. Let's switch some gears. You were at an NBA game this week. Pull that mic down, Conal. You look like...
I'm afraid to manhandle it.
No, you're good.
I went to the Heat against the Hawks.
What a game.
On Tuesday night. Yeah, one of the big ones. Game 3, not of the World Series, but of a season of several thousand games. So,
oh boy.
It was good, though. As I have to say, my previous experience of basketball was going to a Chicago Bulls game against the Knicks on a Friday night, which I expected to be kind of all-out war. There was people falling asleep in seats beside me. I wasn't particularly impressed with that. But I was very impressed with Miami's venue, the AA Arena. Very cool, very intimate. And to be fair to Miami fans, they got behind their team. There was a bit of an atmosphere. A couple of players, I couldn't name them. There was a young guy I was told was a 19-year-old just out of college.
Tyler Hero.
Yeah, he lit up the game. I was very impressed with him.
29 points.
Very impressive.
7 rebounds. Yeah, he's quite good.
Very impressive. You very funnily told me that after 10 minutes, the main draw had hobbled off.
Yeah, Trey Young, second-year guy out of Oklahoma. And 11 minutes he hobbled off, and I'm like, that's the guy you really want to see.
Thanks for that, Trey.
Yeah, thanks a lot, bro.
Really appreciate that. But no, an overall a positive experience. So basketball is back in my good books.
So good to hear. Yeah, no, I mean it's hard. These early, I mean, again, so many games in the NBA, right? So what? You said you had some bones to pick about basketball with me after watching this game, or?
Well, no, as in that Chicago experience.
When did you see the Bulls in 92, 93, like in a championship run?
No,
or?
if it had been then, I would have, having watched Space Jam, I would have enjoyed myself. But no, I just was, the atmosphere killed me. The fact that people are, queuing up for beers and hot dogs throughout the quarters, but that can be said about a lot of sports. So, well,
actually, a few of my non-North American friends, as I live in a house with more than one person, because I sit around and watch basketball a lot. That's what I do. I like sports. I'm boring like that.
It's your craft.
That's what I do. And we watch the Raptors games. These are the NBA defending champions. First observation.
I didn't know that. You never mentioned that on radio.
I actually never mentioned it. I'm actually starting to get a little bit of flack for talking only about Canadian things. I'm like, I try to spread it out. What do you want? They're the NBA champs. Dethrone us then. They always ask, like, the third quarter, there's nobody's back at their seats yet. I'm like, have you been to the former Air Canada Centre, now Scotiabank Arena? I'm like, there is like a plethora of things to do in that arena. Like, you can watch the games on like beautiful, like at a full bar with like gourmet food, like carving stations, like artisan craft beers. Like, it's almost better than the game. And then if you want to go back to your seat, you can go back, and then it's just right there. You know what I mean? It's like just a hop, skip, and a jump away. Like the arena experience is, and I think this is important because especially in NFL, I'm not sure. Have you ever been to an NFL game?
I have, yeah.
And you can attest to this. This is they have to do so much more to keep people's attention and to get people there, because they are competing against sitting on your couch in like your underwear with surround sound and HD, where you can like go make a grilled cheese sandwich or like something and then go to bed. They're competing against that. So that's what live sports. And if you go to an NFL game, the one thing that you miss, where you always see these old school NFL fans. I've been to a number of games, also in Pittsburgh as well, which is a great place to watch a game. They got the earphones in because they want to hear the radio broadcast of the play-by-play, and that's the one thing that the NFL owners and teams of the world, that's what they're competing against. Commentary, like Tony Romo, who's quickly become like one of the greatest commentators in sports, right? Calling plays before they happen. Like, that's what you're competing against. And when you have Miami, you said they have nice concessions, but there's people falling asleep and whatnot. That's because they need. This is the fourth game of it. We're only in 2 weeks into the season.
I think what you're describing to me there, Jordan, if I'm reading you right, is a very diva-like North American fan who, it's not good enough to have the best athletes in the world right in front of their noses. You can't sit there and put your phone down. You have to take selfies of yourself. And
I don't take selfies.
Stuff yourself full of hot dogs and beer outside the stadium within 100 yards of the action. And I think the big difference, the big divide we're seeing here is that there's more cultured fans over in Europe who watch their rugby and watch their soccer, and they don't need this. They just need a couple of beers. They want to sit down.
Pretty sure they're yelling racial slurs.
I don't know about that now. That's slander, very slander.
No, multiple articles written about it. I just think that people's needs there are so many fans. They're trying to reach so many people that you have to have multiple options. And I think, you got to pay for parking. The beers are like $15. You know what I mean? The seats. I mean, I've only been to one Toronto Maple Leafs game. I don't know if you've ever been to a hockey game before, but like if you getting a ticket to the Toronto Maple Leafs is like, it has cost you a fortune. We're talking $500-$600 here. You can't even get season tickets if you wanted. You go on a list. It's almost like
crazy.
So it's like you're competing against a lot of different factors. And I think watching live sports is, truly amazing. I love the NFL live is great and basketball is amazing as well. But, you're competing against your couch and I don't know. Maybe it's just me. Maybe is it different with rugby perhaps? Like, can you enjoy a world-class rugby game without feeling like you're missing something, like with commentary? Like, because I know commentary is very important to the NFL.
Well, you can put in the earpiece, and they do that at games. You have the ref link, or else you can just put in an earpiece and listen to the radio. So, yeah, no, that is important, and some people do like to follow it. But yeah, I suppose that's more simplistic. I mean, I think Irish and English fans are always bowled over by when they go over to North American sports and they see the level of, these activations and, as you say, the fans just demand this now. They expect this. But there's something that has to be done about the price of it. I mean, it's crazy stuff. Same in Miami, 13 quid for a beer. Like, it was a pretty jumbo
where they get
beer.
you the beer.
It was a pretty big beer. I'll give them that. But $13 leaves a bad taste in people's mouths. And especially, I don't get it for basketball, baseball, where there's so many games, and you're asking these people to come back again and again and again. They must just they obviously do their research and say, well, someone will come, someone will take those tickets. So. It's a strange one.
Well, where you can get great entertainment and cheap food and beers? That's 2 weeks from now, Saturday. Cayman versus the U.S. Virgin Islands, CONCACAF Nations League, 6:30 kickoff at the Troombaden Sports Complex. Then on Tuesday, the United States men's national team takes on Cuba, and that has World Cup implications. Canada beat the United States 2-0 3 weeks ago, and then in 2 weeks' time, they're going to go to Orlando to play the U.S., and whatever happens there, Canada looking to get the sixth and final spot in the CONCACAF hexagonal in the region. And, it should be good. So come on out to both of those games. You going to come, Conal?
Yeah, I'm going to try and support our local Cayman Islands on Saturday and try and get them to win. And then, we have one of the biggest national teams in the world. U.S. team have always performed well in the World Cup. So they're literally going to be on our doorstep here on a Tuesday night in an intriguing political clash against Cuba.
The stadium's not ready.
I half expect Donald Trump to fly in and to try and hijack the event in the stand in Troombaden. I can't guarantee his presence, but it's going
to be good football. It's going to be good football. Come out and join us. And thank you to Conal Keane for discussing the Rugby World Cup. South Africa wins. More Let's Talk Sports Radio right here on 94.9 Bob FM. Stick around. Welcome back to Let's Talk Sports Radio right here on 94.9 Bob FM. Joining me now, NFL analyst for thescore.com, Justin Boone, making his triumphant return to our fantasy football segment. Welcome back, sir. How are you?
I'm good. We're halfway through the season here, so hopefully most of the people out there listening have winning records. They're getting ready to make a push for the fantasy playoffs, and if not, now's the time. Last-ditch effort here. You can make some trade. Most leagues, the fantasy trade deadline comes up in a couple of weeks here. So it's the time now. Make some deals and get your team ready and try to get some wins to get yourself in the playoffs.
Pretty optimistic for a Bills fan that had a disappointing loss to the Eagles last week.
Yeah, I completely expected it. I mean, when we saw what the weather was in that game, that it was going to be rainy, that there was the crazy gusting winds, that played right into the Eagles' advantage. They have a fantastic run defense. We weren't going to be able to run the ball on them very well at all. So if you take away the John Brown, Josh Allen deep passes, we were in trouble in that one. So I expected a loss there. I'm not feeling too bad.
No worries. Let's jump right into it at the quarterback position. Your start of the week is Gardner Minshew, a man you've mentioned more than once on this show. He's having quite the year. They are, of course, hosting the Houston Texans. You also like Matthew Stafford on the road versus Oakland. You like Sam Darnold at Miami. Who doesn't like start up your Jets, I guess, this week versus the Dolphins? And you also like Derek Carr versus the Lions at home. Tell me a little bit about why Gardner Minshew is your start of the week at quarterback.
Well, it's really the matchup here. I mean, Minshew's been playing fantastic for a rookie. What we've seen from him has just been great this year. And if you look at his fantasy numbers, he's QB 11 on the season. Nobody would have expected that. And my biggest question with him now is they're going to have their bye after this game. Are they going to go back to Nick Foles? They can't go back to Nick Foles, but they have this old school regime in Jacksonville. And I'm worried that after all the money that they paid to Foles, they're going to bring him back to the start. It'd be a terrible decision, but anyway, that's not what we're talking about here. As far as this week's game goes, looking at the Texans, they're completely banged up on defense. That secondary's had injuries all season long. Now they lost J.J. Watt last week, and even before Watt went out, in their last 4 games, they've given up at least 3 passing touchdowns per game. That's how bad their pass defense is right now. So Minshew's a great play this week. I got him as a top 10 option. Stafford I have even higher, but I think at this point, with how well Stafford's played this season, I think most people are putting him in their lineups at this point. And with a matchup against the Raiders, who are sneaky good against the run and kind of creates a bit of a pass funnel there, I think Stafford's going to be able to have his way with them. Sam Darnold, we've been waiting for it to happen. That Cowboys game really gave us a lot of hope, and then it's been a couple bad games since, but he gets the Dolphins, and everybody puts up numbers on the Dolphins. So even last week when we were worried, Mason Rudolph in the first half had a couple turnovers. Is it really going to be the game that the Dolphins win? No, the Dolphins don't want to win. They're going to find a way to lose, like an all-out blitz where they sent 8 rushers and just left Deontay Johnson wide open in the middle of the field, and he scored a touchdown in that one. And then Derek Carr in that Lions game, I think that could be a little more high-scoring than people realize, and the way to attack the Lions there, you can't attack them through the air. And some of the weapons for the Raiders have been decent this year. Talking about Tyrell Williams in the receiving core, obviously Darren Waller, one of the fantasy MVPs of the tight end position this year. So I think all 4 of those guys are going to be good starts in top 15 plays.
And at running back, moving right along, it's a last man standing. The Jalen Samuels, Pittsburgh Steelers, probably one of the only healthy running backs. You like him at home versus the Colts. And you have some of your stats up, or his stats rather, on thescore.com. You can check out this article. You also like Jordan Howard versus the Bears at home for Philly. Adrian Peterson in Buffalo for Washington, and Devin Singletary alternatively at home versus Washington. Why do you like Jalen Samuel so much? I bet you he was a hot waiver wire pickup this week, considering Connor's injured, Benny Snell is injured, and I think Trey Edmonds was the only other guy they had on the practice squad there in Pittsburgh.
Well, you said it. It's last man standing here, but it's also a situation where we know Samuels can produce in this situation. Last year, and I bet a lot of fantasy owners that picked him up last season remember this, because he had 3 games where he got starter snaps, and they happened to coincide with the fantasy playoffs last year, week 14, 15, and 16. And in those games, you mentioned, I have it in my article this week in Start, Sit, Stash, Quit. In the 3 games, 92 yards from scrimmage, 162 yards from scrimmage, and 64 yards from scrimmage, and a touchdown. He can run the ball. He's a great receiver as well. In college, he was a very versatile back. And even last season, he had tight end eligibility on a lot of sites. I'm pretty sure Yahoo was one of them. So some people were getting an opportunity to play him at tight end during the fantasy playoffs, and that's one of the reasons why he helped a lot of people win fantasy titles, myself included, last year. So he's going to be a guy that could be, I think this year with Mason Rudolph at the helm, it lowers his ceiling a little bit. So he's probably more of a high-end RB2 this week rather than the RB1 that he was last season during that stretch, but he's a fantastic play. And the other thing with him, too, it's not just that James Conner is likely going to be out. He's doubtful, but I'm pretty sure he's not going to play. It's also that Benny Snell, their third-string running back, is going to miss this game. So that's why it could be a situation where he gets 90+% of the snaps there in that backfield, which we know the Steelers have done that in years past, and they had Le'Veon Bell, D'Angelo Williams back in the day. They like to feed one guy, so they're not going to be worried about doing that with Samuels. Jordan Howard against the Bears, they got a revenge game there, but also since Akeem Hicks, their defensive tackle, went out, the Bears' rush defense, not that great. They're still pretty good against the pass, but their rush defense has been getting torched, so Jordan Howard's going to be able to go back in there. He's been playing really well for the Eagles, and Miles Sanders is a little bit banged up for the Eagles right now, so Howard's going to get a lot of work in that one. And Adrian Peterson against the Bills, the only way to attack the Bills' defense really is on the ground. And we saw the Eagles do it last week. We saw Jordan Howard do it last week against Buffalo, and the weather kind of forced them into that game script. But if you try to pass on the Bills, it's not going to go very well, especially when you have Dwayne Haskins, the rookie, as your starter, which Washington announced. So I think they're going to try to feed Peterson the ball since Bill Callahan took over as the coach. That's what they've been doing, win or lose, and I think they're going to lose this one, but they're going to give Peterson a lot of touches in that game. And Devin Singletary, the thing about him is a lot of people were worried in his first game back against the Dolphins, Frank Gore played more. But that was his first game back, and they were huge favorites against the Dolphins. So they didn't need to bring Singletary back and give him a huge workload, maybe have him re-injure that hamstring and miss time again. So they eased him back in that game. And then last week, we saw his touches go back up around that 70% mark in the backfield. So he's the guy to own there. And really, and this isn't just the Bills fan in me saying this, Singletary's a guy that could potentially have this breakout in the second half of the year and help lead people to the fantasy playoffs.
I think a lot of fantasy owners are waiting for that breakout game from Devin Singletary. We'll see if it happens this week. At wide receiver, DK Metcalf, your start of the week versus the Bucks at home, as if Seattle didn't already have a home field advantage. The Bucks have been awful on all facets of the game, really. You still like John Brown. I love that passion for the Bills. First, the Redskins, who are having their own issues. Starvin' Marvin Jones. He ate real nice 2 weeks ago, 40-plus game. Super pumped to have him in my lineup for that game. Again, they are on the road versus Oakland. And Michael Gallup, you like him at home, on the road rather, versus the Giants. I think the cool thing about DK Metcalf is that he's quieting a lot of the doubters. Fantasy, analysts, whomever that said he didn't have a very sophisticated route tree. He's just getting the job done this season.
And I was one of them. I will admit that I thought he was going to come in and really be a one-trick pony. And he has come in and actually shown that he can do more than that, get a lot of red zone looks. He's up near the league lead in red zone targets, and he has that big-bodied physical presence. So you expected that from him. But he's doing more than just catching that deep ball, which I kind of thought was what he was going to sort of hang his hat on. So it's nice to see him have a bit of a breakout in the last little bit. He's been kind of consistent this season as well. He's been putting up pretty good stats, 50 yards or a touchdown in all but one of his games this year. And then you look at his opponent this week. It's wild to see this Bucs defense year after year. You think this is going to be the season that defense gets it figured out. They spend draft picks. They bring in free agents. It's not happening. They've allowed 10 different receivers to reach 70 yards against them this season. And even last week when the Titans receivers didn't put up big yardage against them, but two of them scored touchdowns. So you have to feel good about DK Metcalf in that game. John Brown, my only concern, and we're going to be watching over the next couple days here, my only concern is the wind again. And I can say, being in the area near Buffalo here, very windy this week, and right now the forecast is for 10 to 20 mile an hour winds. So if it's back in that range where it's over 15 miles an hour, and last week it was much worse than that. Last week the gusts were like 40, 50 miles an hour. So hopefully it's not going to be all the way up in that range. But if it is over 15, we do have to worry a little bit more about John Brown. But he didn't have a terrible game last week, and he's been very consistent as well. He's getting over 50 yards in most games. Marvin Jones, great matchup there against the Raiders. I talked a bit about it when we mentioned Stafford. And Michael Gallup, everyone's going to continue to sleep on him because Amari Cooper's the number one receiver there. And Amari Cooper's been having a fantastic season as well. But Gallup is so underrated in that offense. And in this matchup, Janoris Jenkins, the cornerback for the Giants, after a tough start to the season, he's gotten it together. He'll be on Amari Cooper, so that could open up a little more for Gallup in that one.
How about over at tight end? You like Greg Olsen this week at home in Carolina versus Tennessee. You also like TJ Hawkinson. Well, you like a lot of Lions this week versus Oakland. Dallas Goedert, who seems to be getting some nice targets from Carson Wentz for Philly. Again, they're at home versus Chicago. And Jonnu Smith, the Florida International guy, size, speed guy, athletic guy. Marcus Mariota didn't seem to, like to throw him the ball in his first few years in Tennessee. Now they got Ryan Tannehill, and he had a breakout game as a tight end streamer last week. You like him again on the road versus Carolina. Tell me a little bit about your tight end selection here, your best starts.
Well, I will correct you on one thing. There's not a lot of tight ends I like outside of the top 7 or 8 guys every week. You have the really
graveyard.
Good options, and then after that, it's just streamers, and you're just hoping that you can find a guy that, put up at least maybe 50 yards. If you're lucky, they'll get a touchdown, because really, outside of the top 7 or 8 options, it's just a crapshoot at tight end this year. And it ends up being that way most years at that position. So I think Greg Olsen has a pretty good shot here to put up good numbers. We haven't seen that much from him since, I know when Allen took over, there was that Arizona game in week 3 where Olsen went out, had 75 yards and a touchdown. Since then, he only cracked 50 yards once, but I think in this one, he's going to be all right, because the Titans, for as good as that defense is, they're not that good against the tight end. They've been allowing a lot of production to tight ends. They've allowed 90 yards or a touchdown in the position in 6 of their 8 games this season. So as far as streamers go, I do like Olsen as a streamer this week, yeah. As the other guys, like I said, you're sort of just throwing darts here, but TJ Hawkinson, the Raiders are really bad at stopping tight ends, so he's another guy, I think, going along with that Stafford thing. If you're playing in DFS, I think that's a situation where you could stack some of these guys. You put Marvin Jones, Stafford, and Hawkinson together and hope that you get a big game there. Goddard, it's been interesting. Goddard's actually been outproducing Ertz recently. We'll see if that continues, but that's one area you can get the Bears at tight end. They're a little stingy when it comes to going against receivers. They're still holding receivers down pretty well, but I think Goddard will be able to have another good game in that one. And then Jonnu Smith, it's just going to be Delaney Walker being out. I don't particularly love the matchup, but we've seen 2 games in a row here. He's put up over 60 yards, so I like him to potentially do that again with Walker out.
I want to ask you about one specific game. We've already covered a lot. And again, we've got Justin Boone from thescore.com. Check out his work on thescore.com. Follow him on Twitter as well. We got a really good Sunday nighter. You've got Baltimore hosting New England. You've got, obviously, it's very early, but, someone that's looking like an MVP, Lamar Jackson, on the ground, in the air. He's really helped Baltimore become a contender in the AFC versus the best defense in the league, the New England Patriots. I didn't see him on any of your starts, sits, or quits. Obviously, I'm talking about Lamar Jackson, but how effective do you think that Ravens offense that's had such a good run, mind you, against a little bit of a weaker competition? This might be one of their first or second big tests of the season, and they get New England at home. What do you think expectations are for Lamar against that really good, looking like a potentially historic level New England defense?
Well, he takes a hit for sure. He's going to go down in my rankings. He's more in the mid to low end QB1 range, where most weeks he's going to be a top 2 or top 3 option. And that's going to happen to any quarterback that goes up against the Patriots. And something to keep in mind, Patrick Mahomes has to play the Patriots during the fantasy playoffs. Not that you're going to sit him, but that week you might have to lower your expectations for him as well. But as far as this game goes, the interesting thing that I want to see is Belichick always identifies the number one option in your offense and tries to take that away. Is he actually going to be able to prevent Lamar Jackson from running the ball? Because Lamar Jackson, there's just another level of speed with a guy like that. The way he moves with the ball. We're not talking about a regular rushing quarterback. We're not talking about Josh Allen or someone like that can pick up good yardage. Lamar Jackson is a phenomenal runner and somebody who, even if you're scheming to try to stop him, can still pick up yardage on the ground. So I'm curious to see if Belichick can come up with a plan, because I don't think just spying him, I don't think that's going to be enough to slow him down. But the problem I have with the Ravens is their offense, if this game turns into a situation where they're down a touchdown or 2 touchdowns, I still wonder, are they going to be able to come back against a good defense? We saw in the playoffs last year, when they had to, Jackson was able to open it up a little bit, but it was a little too late for him to make a complete comeback in that one. And in this game, that's where I worry. If New England keeps leaning on them, and that Ravens defense, they're still coming together. They made some deals at the deadline there to try to solidify things. They got Marcus Peters in the back end. They're getting a little healthier with Jimmy Smith coming back. We'll see, though, if they can keep the Ravens in a tight contest where you don't have to just turn to Lamar Jackson throwing the ball downfield, because they still really lack big weapons. Marquise Brown should be back in this game, but I don't know if they're going to bring him back and play him on a huge amount of snaps because he's been out for so long. So you think in the first game back, probably limit his snap count. He could still be effective on a limited snap count, but I have him lower in my rankings because of it, because you just don't know. You can't guarantee he's going to be able to produce in such a tough matchup with limited snaps. So in this one, it's going to be a very interesting game. I'm glad it's on Sunday night because we get to watch it and analyze it. We don't have to watch 9 other games at 1 p.m. Up against it, so that'll be good. We'll get to watch Sunday night and get a better feel for both these teams. But I think it's definitely going to be a matchup of 2 teams that are going to go deep in the playoffs this season. And unfortunately, as a Bills fan, I have to say I think the Patriots are going to come out on top.
Yeah, definitely a game that we can just sit down and watch football and not refresh our cell phones or our laptops and see how many points we've scored thus far. Justin Boone, thescore.com lead fantasy analyst. Thank you so much, Justin. Always appreciate you giving us a few minutes of your time.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. That's it for Let's Talk Sports. Join us every Saturday right here on 94.9 Bob FM. For Hurley's Media, I'm a sports guy, and I'm out.